If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. This is the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn, your host, and in this podcast, I share information and strategies to help you put an end to binge eating. If you've been listening since the beginning, I hope that you've gained some valuable and practical ideas that you've been able to apply in your life. I've seen this brain-based approach change so many lives. And even if what you learn here isn't the entire solution for you, I hope it does make a big difference and it allows you to feel empowered and capable of achieving freedom from binge eating. No one's recovery will look exactly alike or follow the exact same path. You may take the information you learn here and combine it with another approach that you find helpful, or you may decide to dive deeper into the information you're learning here by reading my books or enrolling in a course with me and Cookie Rosenblum. You may use nutritional advice from another book or podcast, or consult a professional who can help you meet your nutritional needs. I believe that everyone is capable of recovery, no matter how long the binge eating habit has been present. But not everyone gets to recovery on the same timeline. And I want to say here something that I do say at the end of every podcast, and that is never to hesitate to seek medical attention if you feel you need it. This is even more true if purging is involved, and you do not feel capable of stopping that behavior on your own at this point. This podcast is meant to be empowering, not to take the place of any medical advice or the support of health practitioners. I wanted to say this in today's introduction because I think it's very important that you know how this podcast fits into your recovery. What you learn here may certainly be the complete picture for you, and you may be able to walk away from your binge eating for good. Or you may be someone who needs more tools and more support, and either scenario is perfectly okay. Everyone is different, and you have to make decisions in recovery that take your own personal situation and your personal history and even your personality into account. This definitely applies to today's topic as well, which is about whether or not to drink alcohol while also trying to stop binge eating. There is not a yes or no clear-cut answer to this question, but it's definitely a common question that I've received over the years of helping people stop binge eating, and it's one that I want to answer in detail for you today. It might seem odd that on a podcast dedicated to binge eating recovery that I'm talking about whether or not to consume alcohol. But I'm definitely not going to be giving you advice about whether or not to drink overall, but specifically how it may or may not affect your recovery from binge eating. It's important for you to know that the information I'm sharing is not for people who have a problem with alcohol. This advice is for people who drink moderately or occasionally, and drinking isn't a problem in and of itself. This is not for you if you feel like you overuse alcohol and you have a hard time keeping it under control. For our purposes today, we're just going to focus on moderate or occasional drinking and whether or not that's okay, while also trying to learn to dismiss binge urges. I want you to listen to this scenario and see if it sounds familiar to you. You're doing well dismissing binge urges, and you feel like you're making good progress toward change and toward erasing this habit, even if it does feel uncomfortable at times. Then, you decide to go out and have a couple glasses of wine with your friends. And when you get home, you're still feeling that effect of the alcohol. You may be hungry from a long night out, or you might just think some food would be appealing. That's perfectly fine. And so you start eating. But then that familiar urge to binge arises. But in that moment, you don't feel like you have as much motivation to dismiss the urge. When you're still feeling that effect of the alcohol, you may be more swept away by it, and maybe you don't implement the strategies that you've learned and that have worked for you. You temporarily feel less inhibited, and you feel like in that moment, that you might not even care about recovery. That is, until after the binge or after you've become completely sober, or in the morning when you fully remember what you did and that what you truly want is recovery. The memory of the binge may even be a little fuzzy, as memories can be sometimes when alcohol is involved. You may be frustrated by this because you know rationally that it's not what you truly wanted, but in that moment you just weren't thinking clearly. You may be able to get back on track rather easily and start making positive changes. But then the next time that you decide to have alcohol, you may find that again, you have more trouble dismissing the urges to binge. You may start to notice this pattern between consuming alcohol and binge eating. This is not a pattern for everyone, but it is definitely common to have more trouble dismissing binge urges when you've had some alcohol. And I'm going to explain why this happens. You know that to dismiss the binge urges, you have to rely on the capability of your higher brain, and more specifically, the prefrontal cortex. The higher brain is the part of the brain that can inhibit automatic responses and habitual responses, including that habitual response to binge from the lower brain. The higher brain is very powerful, but alcohol directly affects the higher brain, and it can reduce your ability to make sound decisions and use self-control. And this is something that people who consume alcohol just intuitively know. We all know it's more likely that you might do something silly or something you'll regret after having alcohol. And you can see why having a brain that's less able to utilize self-control and make rational decisions is not an ideal state for dismissing urges. With each drink, the higher brain is impaired a little more, and you may notice that this leads to a temporary lack of desire for recovery. Remember that your lower brain thinks you need to run on automatic programs and automatic habits, and it actually thinks you need to binge to survive. It's your higher brain that knows better. So when the higher brain is affected by alcohol, you may suddenly feel like you don't really know better. In addition to weakening the higher brain, alcohol has the opposite effect on the lower brain. Drinking causes a release in dopamine, which arouses the pleasure center in the lower brain. This could possibly mean an increase in your urges to binge, but not necessarily. The drinking could simply be pleasurable all by itself, along with the social situation you may be enjoying as well. And you may not have any further desire for additional pleasure or that false pleasure of a binge. The main message is that although alcohol has some definite effects on the brain, everyone experiences these effects in slightly different ways. So I want you to think about your own past experiences with alcohol as a binge eater and determine what effect it had on you personally and on your self-control or your ability to dismiss the urges to binge. Remember, not everyone trying to quit binge eating needs to abstain from alcohol. That's a decision you need to make based on your own experience, and I hope that what I'm discussing here will help you make that decision. I want to share just a little about me personally in relation to this topic. I did not change my alcohol consumption when I first quit binge eating. At the time, I had an occasional drink, maybe a beer or glass of wine, sometimes two, only a couple of times a month. And since it only took a few months for my binge urges to decrease significantly, if you do the math, this only gave me about 6 times to experience the effects of alcohol on my binge urges and my ability to avoid acting on them. Looking back, I do not specifically remember any noticeable increase in my binge urges under the influence of alcohol, or I don't remember having any more difficulty avoiding binges during or after drinking. This could simply be because I didn't drink very much. Not having much alcohol, it wasn't something that I resolved to do to help myself in recovery. I just naturally wasn't into drinking very much. Maybe if I would have had an occasion where I drank more than a couple of drinks, it might have ended in me following an urge. There's really no way to know, but I'd like to think that binge eating was so off limits in my mind that I still would have been able to say no. Based on my own experience and that of others I've worked with, I know that it's very possible to drink and to not binge, just like it's possible to drink and not do other things that you'll regret. Even with that altered consciousness after drinking and a weakened higher brain, I'm sure there are things you would never, ever consider doing, even if you had too much to drink. A prominent example of this would be driving a car. You simply know you're not going to do it. It's not an option, so you plan around it. You don't even consider it. There's just no way. And you can fully trust yourself not to, even if you've had too much to drink. And it can be the same with binge eating. If you choose to continue to have some alcohol while also recovering, then binge eating has to become something you view as not an option, ever. So that even in that hazy state, you can still say no. If you don't quite feel that level of confidence right now, and you do notice a pattern of binge eating very frequently after drinking, you'll need to think about what you'll do with alcohol. If you decide to have it, you'll need to approach drinking with extreme caution. You'll need to create a plan for yourself beforehand, just like you would plan to avoid driving. Or you may want to strongly consider giving it up right now, until your recovery feels much more solid. That does not mean you need to give it up forever. You may be someone who wants to take a middle-of-the-road approach and decide just to stick to a very small amount of alcohol, or only have alcohol in certain situations where you feel like it would be very unlikely for you to decide to binge during or after the drinking. The bottom line is to create a plan that feels safe for you and that you can feel good about. That's all for today's topic. I hope it helps you avoid the possibility of alcohol throwing you off track in recovery, because that never has to happen. I always mention at the end of each show that you can get my free ebook, The Brain Over Binge Basics, by clicking the link in the show notes. Today, I want to let you know that I've had some technical issues lately where people did not receive their ebooks, and I truly apologize for this. It's possible that the confirmation email where you get the ebook could go to your spam, so please check your spam folder first. But if you still did not receive it, you can find my email address in the show notes. Please send me a message telling me that you did not receive your ebook, and I'll get it to you as soon as possible. And again, I apologize for the technical issue. I appreciate you being here today, and I hope you'll join me again next time. I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.